Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin, and I'm joined, as always, by Dr. Matthias Nordvik.
Hello, everybody. This time we're joined by Skakasawa, the artist behind the one-person black metal band Blackbraid. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me on. It's exciting.
Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Time to join us. Ooh, Matthias, we're getting in sync. Yeah, we did that. We were like perfectly timed then. It's only taken 100 odd episodes. I'm super excited about this. I know it might not be strictly Nordic mythology, but a lot of our stuff isn't anyway. And
this is still relevant.
Oh, absolutely. But I think for me in particular, the Native American side of things really fascinates me. And I just don't know enough about it. I've been on the European side. I feel like anything we learn organically comes from TV or film, and it's going to be so inaccurate, I imagine. Unless you really do your own individual deep dive and kind of get in there, I think we just get secondhand knowledge from TV. So I'm looking forward to actually seeing some truths.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's so hit and miss. You know, there is a lot of some stuff out there is accurate, but there is a lot of garbage out there too. And it's really hard to know like what is what, I guess, if you're, especially if you're on a different continent and you don't really know what to go by. But
I mean, we get that with this when it comes to the Vikings. You get tons of misinformation put out in movies and TV shows, and then you get a bunch of people who then get into this and think that stuff's accurate. And I don't know if the same thing happens.
And then you got a bunch of bros with Viking mohawks.
Well, that's it. And I was that just got me curious whether that happens in kind of the Native American communities as well. Like, because you'll get particularly, I guess, a sect of Americans and Europeans and Brits who really get into the Viking culture and then identify as being Scandinavian. They'll find a link back at some point, and then it becomes they're almost like their identity. And you get a bunch of then infighting amongst who knows the most and who knows this. Does that happen with Native American culture?
Man, it's almost, it's like uncanny how big the similarities are there. Like it's almost the same situation, just going the other direction. Because I see that a lot here too. Being a history buff and stuff, I do know a good deal about Scandinavian history and the Vikings and stuff. And like here in the US, you can see the same thing. Like there's these guys that are like just 100% British American who like discover that maybe their great-great-grandfather went to Norway or something, and then they listen to Amon Amarth, and then they become like Viking obsessed. And they're like 100% Viking through and through. And it's like there's just like this huge kind of like fake culture around it. I don't really know what else to call it. It sounds kind of mean to call it fake, but like it's obviously, it's not really based in truth when it comes down to it. And honestly, it happens almost in the exact same way with Native culture. You see a lot of people in the US doing the same thing. Like they'll really romanticize just like certain very small aspects of Native culture, like the headdress or the war bonnet or something, and then it's also like a very common thing, like the genetic thing, like white Americans like really try really hard to find like the most minuscule link to any sort of Native American blood they can in their lineage. And like it's a little weird at times, but like I have white people come up to me on the street all the time, and not really anymore because I don't live in a city. But like when I was younger and I was going out and I was in the city and stuff, people would be like, "Oh, are you Native American?" And they, it'd be two guys look just like you, and they'd be like, "Oh, we're full blood Cherokee." And like, it's all the time, and it's always Cherokee. Like for some reason, everyone everyone thinks they're Cherokee. That's like the one tribe that everyone believes that they came from.
Yeah,
I think
that's
it's
true.
probably the most well-known tribe, other than the Sioux tribe. I think I'm all out of tribes there. So that shows my kind of the level of knowledge I'm at. So I can. That's probably why it is that, because it's made up. We get it all the time. I don't know if you get it the same with like legendary figures, but I'm the son of Ragnar, or even people like I'm the son of Odin, or like I can track it back to this like legendary figure, and it's like, no, you can't. You fucking really can't.
No, the statistical probability of anybody with like quote unquote Norwegian blood to some extent descending from Harold Finehair or something like that is pretty high. I think it's about 60 to 70% who can be expected to have some kind of genetic link to those like known Vikings and stuff like that. I think it's really fascinating. Like this situation, it tells us a lot. Like sometimes I actually refer to Vikings as sort of like they've become the new Native Americans to a lot of white Americans, right? That like they're the new sort of like link to sort of like you take different concepts and pour them in. You have warrior, you have like child of nature, those kinds of things, and that comes together as sort of like the thing we want to associate with. So I think what it actually tells us is that there's a lot of people in this country who are very hungry for deeper connections in many different ways, and unfortunately it takes these silly forms.
Yeah, I think, but the big difference has to be that I guess the Vikings or Scandinavians weren't oppressed in the same way.
Oh yeah.
So I was wondering your thought on that, on people then looking for that small percentage of native. Must be very odd when you clearly you will have struggled for being native. That must be a strange thing. Whereas it's not really the same when it comes to Scandinavia, because don't have that same kind of oppression there.
Yeah, it definitely is weird. It's a bit weird. It's almost like I don't really want to, I don't want to dive into the psychology of it too much, but it kind of seems like they're looking for a way to absolve themselves of the guilt, maybe.
Okay.
Because white people did a lot of awful things to us in this country, under the banner of Christianity mostly. But it's, if you're living in this country as a white person, it's kind of hard. Like it's a really hard thing to acknowledge, especially if it was generations ago, and like, you can see the issues that colonization caused are still very relevant and stuff, but it's obviously not like, it's not something that happened in our lifetime. So it's like, it's a really sticky situation where maybe, it only happened like 100 or 200 years ago, and a lot of the wounds are still very fresh, and there's still a lot of tensions between Native and white people in the U.S. We still get a lot of racism, so it's almost kind of like I think a lot of people kind of feel guilty about that. It kind of almost is like a way for them to try to like absolve themselves without, I don't know. It's tricky to say why people do those things, but that would be my guess. But it's funny because like you said that about people trying to trace their lineage back to Ragnar and stuff, and it's like like at this point, like it happened so long ago that like so many people can, like you said, like 41% or something descended from that dude. So it's like not very uncommon. But with us, it's like such a different story because the Indian Wars were just like 150 years ago or something. So like, and also Native Americans, like it's pretty much all oral history and tradition. We weren't writing shit down or doing like extensive documentation or anything. it's mostly we pass our shit down through like storytelling and oral stuff. So like as far as like giant historical figures like that and stuff, like there's not much known about people more than 100 or 200 years ago. So like all the really famous Native Americans are still, they've only been dead maybe 100 years at most. So like it is a thing, like not so much with like people pretending to be Native American or looking for a reason to claim it, but like amongst the actual full-blooded Native Americans, like it's a big kind of status symbol to be like, oh, like Crazy Horse was my great grandfather, or like like Sitting Bull was my cousin or my second cousin. So like a lot of the times you'll see natives kind of like going at each other for clout with like their own lineage, because like the Little Bighorn and Wounded Knee and shit like that was 120 years ago or something. So like we're still at the point where like a lot of these people, like their great grandchildren are alive now.
I feel like you could trace that and call them liars, though. That must be, you must be quite easily able to trace back and go, well, you're not.
You can, but at the same time, like we were also polygamous, and there was no there's no documentation, so like who's to say if Crazy Horse had 7 children or 9 children,
right?
And then like who's to say how many children each of those children had? Like there's just like so many things that are undocumented that it's like there's a very good chance. Like it's also kind of a problem with like intermarriage with Native Americans, because like so many of us are related and don't know it until we take a DNA test or something.
Honestly, historically, that has also been a problem in Scandinavia.
I imagine that's been a problem everywhere.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's funny because a lot of tribes still cling to stuff like that, because I guess that might be one of the only major differences. Is like our big heroes and like war heroes and stuff and chiefs like are still in the very recent past for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting you saying about it being passed down through oral traditions, because that's pretty much exactly the same as what I guess Nordic mythology was passed down. So
I mean, originally these were also stories that were passed down orally, or poems that were remembered and recited, and until they were written down in the 1200s. So, I mean, it's a fascinating thing to study, sort of like how oral stories develop, and also when you're talking about that, you're also talking about what is actually truth, right? And we have like in like the Western way of thinking about truth, it always goes back to, well, is it written in a book somewhere? Like that's been sort of like the standard for truth, right? And that's an entirely different too in oral traditions, where truth is actually like multifaceted in different ways, and also quite often has a lot to do with like relevance, like what this person is saying right now or telling in this story, is this relevant to us or not? And if it's not relevant, then there's also a tendency to say, well, then it's not truthful. But if it is relevant, then it becomes truthful. So I think that's incredibly fascinating to think about, the fact that we humans actually don't have a set truth that we can access, because the idea that truth comes in books and written stuff is just a construction that we've made.
Yeah.
I think I have 2 questions. One would be that with obviously native history and the stories, it's still very much in there now. I imagine it's very still told from generation to generation, because it is such a recent past. And it's still going on. It's still traveling through today. Whereas with kind of Nordic mythology, it's dead and buried in a sense of that it's not really passed on in the way that it traditionally was, it was cut out by Christianity coming in and sweeping across. So, Matthias, do you think that we can learn things in how things survive in the native cultures today, because it is kind of a newer way, but it's so similar but new, and we can look at that and apply that back to kind of the lost things and look at maybe how these were translated and moved.
Yeah, actually, in my my book on volcanoes in Old Norse mythology, I
always plugging that bloody book.
Hey, it's the only research book I've written. Okay. Well, what I do in there is that I use some scholarship on Native American storytelling to better understand how this situation could have been in Iceland before they had any writing. And there's a really great book called Wisdom Sits in Places. Keith Basso has written it. He followed Apache placemakers, so storytellers about place around in the landscape and heard their stories. And what they do is that they have place names that are very descriptive for a location, and then they like unfold a story from that place name. There's one particular one that I remember, which is about so the location is called Shits in Tents. That's the translation. And the story that the elder is telling about this is a story about these two groups that were living there. And one of them had a bountiful harvest of maize or corn, and the other group didn't. And then the group that had all the corn, they didn't want to share. So they were just sitting in their tents eating, and then the other group they got mad, and so they besieged them, and kept them in the tents until they were like just sitting there eating and shitting and eating and shitting and eating and shitting. And this is like a funny story in hearing it now, but it actually carries a very important message about sharing, right? About taking care of your community. And you can look at place names in Scandinavia in the same way, and you can see different things about historical developments or the relevance of a place. There are plenty of place names in Scandinavia that have that have been named after gods. There are place names that carry tribal names, and then we can also identify the origin of the first sort of incipient feudal societies, where you see like a man who owns land. That comes in the 500s. So you can see that before that, we don't have a lot of like place names that indicate, oh, this guy owns this land. But then in the 500s, all of a sudden, there's like an explosion of place names, especially in southern Scandinavia, that indicate that somebody inherited land. So you can trace like the history of a people, the history of societal developments and all these things, and also ideas that these societies had through place names. And so I think that's, those storytelling traditions are incredibly fascinating because they are emplaced in the landscape. And when we read Nordic mythology, it's detached now. Like there's not a lot that has to do with specific locations any longer because it was put in a book instead.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
absolutely. This could be completely ignorant, I don't know, I'm gonna ask it anyway. Am I right in thinking that with native stories, they tend to be kept very close and not shared to outsiders? Is that pretty common?
Yeah, I mean, it really just depends who's telling it, I think. You really can't say, I guess. Some people, it really just depends who's telling the story, I know a lot of people that won't really tell, they're very guarded and they won't really speak to outsiders at all. But then there's people who are the opposite too.
Okay.
So I think it's pretty situational in that case, I would say.
Mhm.
Okay. So yeah, I can't remember where I heard that, and I just wondered whether it was seen as culturally bad to maybe share the stories, particularly of the mythology, like outwardsly.
Yeah, maybe a bit more in the past, I think.
Mhm.
You know, our culture was really decimated by the government and the church.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
and we were a lot of people were really guarded about it for a long time, but in our lifetime, you've kind of seen it go in the other direction a bit, where like um, the culture and the language is almost going extinct because it was wiped out so thoroughly. And
Mhm.
now it seems, in the last few decades, like people are kind of more apt to share things, and
Mhm.
it's almost like a revival of the culture. Like
Yeah.
it's more in the public light again. And we're not persecuted for doing these things anymore, where it used to be illegal, so it's easier to talk
Mhm.
about them now too.
Mhm.
Which probably has something to do with why, you know, people, especially older people, are so guarded about things.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
they used to cut out your tongue and shit for that, maybe 80 years ago,
Mm.
That's
70
fucking
years
that's
ago.
fucking wild.
Uh,
That's
so
insane.
um, it comes back to kind of how it's all a very new, like a very recent development.
Mhm.
Like the last boarding school I think closed less than 50 years ago.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So yeah,
But
there's just it's all like, I guess it would really be situational though, to answer your
yeah.
question. Like it just depends how people feel, I guess.
I get, yeah, and it depends on like you said, the circumstances, how the vibe is maybe at the time, and if you're getting on with, you trust the people. It's all a big spectrum, I guess. That's again, that's another comparison I think we can kind of make. I imagine when Christianity came to Scandinavia, you had the same thing happen where you couldn't practice, the old religions. So you had to then be inwardly and not share these stories anymore. And whereas there's a much bigger difference in time between then and obviously with native, but it's a similar sort of thing of it being pushed down and punished. And it kind of, that's, I guess, one of the reasons why we know so little concretely about the Nordic mythologies.
Well, yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. I mean,
go ahead.
yeah, just to say like, yeah, probably from maybe, like 1875 to about 1950 or 1960. Um, it was like pretty illegal to really identify with our own culture at all, to like have an Indian name or speak an Indian language or tell Indian stories. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, a lot of it was really lost in that time period. It wasn't until like the 70s and 80s where we started winning our rights back in this country. Like I don't think
Mm-hmm.
we had freedom of religion nationwide. Wasn't legalized until uh 79, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all very recent, and I think that probably leads to, yeah, why some
Well,
people
see,
are still so guarded
this
with it.
is
Matthias,
yeah, I just want to attach the comments that this is also kind of interesting because one of the things that is often overlooked in this country when we talk about civil rights movements is the Native American civil rights movement, like the great strides of like regaining rights, the right to exist as free human beings, right? Voting rights, being considered citizens, all of these things, right? That comes in the 70s for Native Americans here. That's
mm-hmm.
very recent. Like think about that. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, going to this the subject of like, what does Christianity do when it enters Scandinavia?
Just before
Yeah,
we jump onto that, just if we put a pin in it. Before the show, you said that we could call you John if we wanted, because your name is hard to pronounce,
Yeah, yeah.
particularly for me, and Matthias nailed it, I think, in the end after a little correction. Is that a hang up from what you were saying just then about how having the native name is a negative thing? So you automatically kind of have this reaction to give this white English easy name for people.
No, it's not so much that. Um, Skagesau is like an alias for me. Like I took it because I play black metal. So I'm
Okay.
not like that. I'm not like insanely attached to it. Like I've gone by John my whole life, but
Okay.
Skagesau is the equivalent of like, like being like Abbott or Fenris or something, It's just like a name I use for
Oh,
Blackbraid.
okay. Okay. I thought that was your birth name, and then you just was simplifying it for us because
No, no.
I'm
So
dumb and there's no way I can pronounce it.
no, it is like yeah, I took that name just for Blackbraid. So
Okay. Okay, that
yeah.
clears it up. Sorry, Matthias, carry on.
Yeah. So, yeah, what you see is the first thing that always happens when Christianity comes into a location is that the people get regulated in accordance with what is considered right or proper from the Christian perspective. So we can see in the medieval laws, like the main thing that they worry about is whether or not you do like pagan ritual. So there's in the Norwegian law code, that there's like a stipulation that says you cannot go and make sacrifices to the heathen Veitir, actually, so the beings, and you also can't go Finfara, which has that might be like, for lack of a better term, some kind of shamanic ritual that we see both Sami and also Germanic speaking Scandinavians doing. And in the same way, you see this type of regulation here in America. A couple of things that we don't think about too much today as like, oh, that actually has its origin in trying to regulate and punish too the Native American populations are prohibitions against gambling and also prohibitions against dancing. So that, we might have seen Footloose, right? And that's like this weird stuck-up conservative town, and you can't dance and all that stuff. All that shit comes from trying to regulate Native Americans back in the day. So like these things also like become part of the culture. And then all of a sudden you have like these societies where you can't dance and you can't gamble and all of that stuff. So it's like there's like still things that are part of like not so much dancing, but the gambling thing. Like it's curious to see how there are laws against gambling pretty much everywhere in the US. And that's just like taken for granted that that's something that needs to be regulated for some reason. And it's like the actual reason is colonization. Like it is because gambling was such a big part of Native American cultures across the continent, because gambling wasn't just like, oh, getting a rush out of like trying to win something. It was also a way to exchange, right? Like exchange all kinds of things. And so like that was a way for the settlers to break a like core aspect of Native American culture, in a way to disseminate the property in different ways.
The gambling thing, I don't really understand it. Being a Brit, it's an odd thing. We can just gamble pretty much anywhere. It's not a thing. But I apologize if I come across as ignorant, but I guess I am, because I just don't really know that much about it. The gambling thing I've always seen on like TV shows, or kind of particularly being a fan of combat sports. There's always like talk of like the reserves being able to house things that maybe you can't have elsewhere.
Yeah.
What is that? Why is like the whole gambling thing? It does seem to be there's a lot of native casinos, and I've never really understood why.
Well, natives are actually. I don't know the the details of the law, but natives are pretty much the only people in the U.S. allowed to gamble.
Okay.
For the most part, and that comes down to territory laws. So like you can't gamble legally on U.S. soil. Obviously, there's ways around it. Like, I I think there's like online betting and stuff, and
Mhm.
there's race tracks and stuff where you can bet on horses or whatever. But it's like really hard, like to make a casino. Like you can't just make a casino or a racetrack like you could start your own hotel or restaurant or something.
Yeah.
It's not this business. Like you are not allowed to make a facility because of like US laws.
Mhm.
But the loophole in that is that the reservations aren't considered US soil, they're sovereign nations. So if they never made their own laws against gambling, then it's not illegal on them.
Okay.
Um,
Okay. Does that bring a lot of wealth to the? Because do you get people like outsiders then coming in for the casinos for the right to gamble? I guess.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then, and
because
then it
anyone
becomes
can go
a
gamble.
revenue stream.
Yeah, that is really it. It is a major source of revenue for a lot of tribes, I would say.
Mhm.
The ones that have casinos anyway. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a couple of exceptions here and there. Like for instance, the town I live next to, like Blackhawk, they have gambling too. But yeah, it is incredibly difficult to get away with.
Yeah.
If I may shift gear, I really want to hear about Blackbraid.
Oh, before we do, I know this might be a little bit of a dark path, but again, it's something that I know nothing about, and I'd love to know a little bit more about. And I saw it in the news, and somebody asked it in the chat, and that was to do with, you mentioned boarding schools, and I just kind of like nodded my head and was like, yeah, but I never really understood in what relation the boarding schools were. But then I remember hearing a bunch of stuff on the news earlier in the year, and I just never really kind of understood it. And I don't know if we can have like a quick kind of
without really delving into it too deeply, because it's like such a we could talk about it for a week.
Yeah.
It's one of the darkest things that's ever happened on this continent, I would say. But the boarding schools were essentially concentration camps for children. And they would send our children there. They'd shave their heads and brainwash them, and they'd make them stop speaking their native language, and they'd give them all Christian names. They cut out their tongues if they spoke their language. Torture them, things along that lines. Hundreds of thousands of children were murdered and put in unmarked graves at boarding schools over the course of like the last 100 years. And they were pretty much like institutes they were run by the government and the Catholic Church. And they were pretty much like institutes they were like concentration camps to erase our culture is what the main goal of them was. And like I said, those aren't really a thing of the past. Like the last boarding school in Canada closed in 1994. And I think it was like 89 or something in the US was the last one to close. So, but
that's fucked.
That's
probably what got me is that
they would take the children off the reservations once they'd come once a year, and then they'd take all the children, and they were boarding schools. They'd go away for the year or whatever. And
I feel like boarding schools just isn't the right, because that's not a boarding school to me. Like in England, like a boarding school is where people send their kids. I guess it's the same. Word in America, like you just send people send their kids away for like a term or semester, and then they come back. Like that's not a boarding school. That's
I think concentration camp is a better term for it.
Fucking hell. That got me. Because that's just something that we don't hear about over here. Like I'd heard about, when they found some children, was it in Canada, in one of the churches, like you kind of hear it peripherally, but you just don't know the details, or they don't go into it. I guess it's all just buried in hush hush.
So Canada found in Canada, they just started digging, because there's all the boarding schools have unmarked graves, because they wouldn't like bury the children, they just like toss them in a ditch or whatever. So Canada like just started looking for unmarked graves last year, and that's like why it's in the news now, is because it's like kind of the wound has been like reopened. But I mean,
So it should.
even in the last year, I think the number of unmarked children graves they found is up to like 16 or 17,000 now in Canada.
Wow.
Across the last 18 months or whatever it has been they're digging. And they've also only checked maybe like 20 or 30 out of like 150 schools.
Fucking
So
hell.
Holy
it's
shit.
the number is definitely in the hundred thousands. It's just like it's one of those things like no one really wanted to talk about. So it kind of just did like get ignored for
Mhm.
most of the last century, and now it's kind of getting uncovered again. But
Good.
yeah, it's
Fucking
like
hell.
it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg that you're seeing right now. Like there's definitely a lot out there that
Mhm.
still isn't being talked about.
Yeah.
Yeah, I imagine it's scary to even think how deep it goes, because once with things like this, once the card goes and the house, the house card starts to topple, there's no stopping it. Once people start really getting into it, and particularly these days where things spread online so fast and people get rally behind it, and you see movements behind it, I guess the layers start to come off, and it just, you can't put that back in the box. As much as the government, as much as Christianity want to fucking jam that back in the box and hide it, like once it's out, I guess it's out, and it might not be as quick as it should be, but it does start to slowly turn and kind of escape.
Yeah, yeah.
But unfortunately, the people responsible are probably fucking dead and buried, and are never going to feel any reparations for what they did.
Yeah. Yeah, most likely. I mean, it's mostly the church is what it is. The government was involved equally, but like the Catholic Church really spearheaded the boarding school movement.
Mhm. Yeah.
Fucking hell. Okay.
I mean, I think also, is a decent segue into your project Blackbraid, because and one of the things that you do in your music, so as we were talking about just before we started recording, I read an interview where you said that like you've been, as you're a fan of black metal, so you know a lot of Scandinavian black metal and that kind of stuff, and you were like, well, that's getting boring, that's getting uninteresting. And so what you did is that, like, for your music project, you have combined the sounds of black metal, the sounds of like nature, and also traditional sounds of different kinds. And what you're highlighting is also the history of Native Americans, and I find that to be an incredibly fascinating project. So I would love to hear you talk more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of been my goal from day one, is kind of like, I love black metal, and it's not even so much like maybe it's not even that boring, but I feel like it's oversaturated, because Europe is like the undisputed king of black metal, and there's just so much coming out of Europe all the time. And it's not even like I'd say it's boring, but like like I love classic black metal, like Dissection and Immortal, stuff like that. Immortal's huge for me, guys like that. But it's like it's not even like it's bad or boring, so to speak, but like it's so hard to stand out at this point in time. It's just because these albums come out and I'm like, oh, this sounds like Immortal, but it's like really hard not to just be like, oh, like these guys want to be Immortal, or like these guys want to be Bathory, or like Dark Throat or something. Like it just seems like it's getting kind of crowded. Like there's so much, it's like such a saturated genre, and it's like I love that classic black metal sound, but I don't I kind of wanted to find a way to make it more unique, I guess. Because as much as I love that stuff like Immortal and Dark Throne and shit like that, like it just didn't seem interesting to me to put out another, like really northern winter wintry pagan
Yeah.
album. So like I wanted to have something unique in there, and I also really just want to write genuine metal. So I wanted to write something that I could identify with, you know, and that like comes from my heart and stuff.
Mhm.
And you know, there's also like not really any really fucking great. I mean, there's a ton of great Native American black metal guys out there,
Mhm.
but they're all like really small and underground.
Yeah.
And you know, there's no Native American like Metallica or Ozzy or you know or Mayhem or just some like powerhouse of black metal. Like there's no Dark Throne or Mayhem or any of those
Mhm.
guys equivalent. Um, and getting big was never really my intention, but it's just like I kind of wanted to just like be, you know, it's almost like I see all these guys, all these other native guys that are doing awesome black metal, and like it really seems to be taking off here in the US. It's becoming a bigger movement so fast, and they're doing great things. And like I love black metal too, and it was kind of just like, hey, I should get in on this. Like I really want to write some black metal, and like it was almost like, you know, um, seeing what a lot of those guys did that were around before me was like kind of just like the kick I needed to like make my own music, I guess. So
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. It's, I mean, it's everyone has to have a USP as well. You have to have like your own little unique thing that's just different, because whether it's black metal or it's Viking music like Vodruna, Highland, you get so many people who just copy or try and imitate that because they think that's the way to success, and then there's just a shitter version of the real thing. Like, you know, true artists, they carve their own path and they go, okay, I'm inspired by this, but I also love this, or this is my heritage, this is my culture, and I'm going to put the two together and go in this slightly different direction, and then, you know, like I say, create your own path, and that's where success lies. And it's fascinating when you said you there was no aim to get big, and usually that's when it actually happens, when you're not looking. So many people, they search for success and it never comes, but then when you just focus on your craft and you just want to make cool stuff that you love, then that's when it resonates with people and they go, okay, well, this guy is fucking for real.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, that was really what I was going for. It was just like I really wanted to make a black metal album that I was feeling kind of uninterested with a lot of the stuff coming out at the time, and I just like really wanted to make something interesting. I think is what it comes down to.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd say that, you know, yeah, you're totally right. There's a lot of like really awesome Native American black metal out there. I follow a couple bands here and there and like try to keep up, but I'm sure there's a lot more that I haven't, you know, got on my radar yet. Hopefully,
I'm sure you can get some recommendations.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
But there's also like, you know, I feel like there's something happening in the US right now with like this genre of music. We saw Zeal and Ardor come out some years ago, and that's another innovative path with black metal and metal in general. And then you also have Panopticon as another black metal artist, not Native American, but what he does is that he through his music tries to connect to the locations that he's from and that he loves and like feels connections to in different ways. And one of the things that I noticed when I was reading the lyrics to your Barefoot Ghost Dance on Blood-Soaked Soil is that one, it highlights, of course, you know, what the title also signals.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't talked about the title. That's fun.
Well, so like what I want to say is that the one, it highlights, you know, Native American struggles and the bloody history, and on the other hand, it also the lyrics are, you know, focused on on nature as well, and at least that's how I'm interpreting them. That what is happening to our Earth, what is happening to the place that we live, and I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about that. Like, what are you telling us? What should we understand from this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say like it's probably everything that Blackbraid does is like really based in nature somehow. You know, in that one too, that song is kind of like an abstract concept, I guess. It kind of like I just kept kind of writing, and it was like kind of spiraling, and I didn't really know what I was writing about at times, but it's very emotional. The only way I can really describe it, I think, would be you know, nature's such a huge inspiration on me, and our relationship with it and stuff, and it's a really beautiful thing, and a lot of the album is really based in you know, like reverence for nature and the beauty and wildness of it, I would say, and almost more like appreciative of it, whereas like Ghost Dance kind of stands out more to me as like that was really like the negative song on the album, like the one where I was like pouring all my sadness and you know, just all these things that weigh on me, and the things that bother me most about our past, and it was just like a really heavy song, and it's very sad and angry, and the rest of Blackbraid of that album anyway kind of feels different to me. It was kind of almost, yeah, like a vent for me or something, where I could put out kind of the more negative emotions and stuff, and I think that's why it probably came out so heavy.
I mean, honestly, like I think it's a beautiful song. Like that's the one on the album that I connected to, and I was like, all right, yeah, this is like that, like that's the core connection for me on the album. So like personally, that is my favorite song. So yeah, like, no, for me that's just, you know, fascinating that you describe it as like, you know, that this is where you poured all your sadness into.
Yeah, that's the best way I can describe it, I think. Like it's really probably the most like emotional song on that album for me, I would say.
Yeah, usually we had a bunch of musicians on here, and the songs that really tap into the emotion tend to always be the ones that stand out. I think there's just some sort of connection between artist and song when it really gets raw. And I mean, like you said, it's about the atrocities done to the natives. I mean, it pisses me off, and I'm not native, so I can't imagine when you sit down then to write and are in the headspace of kind of these things of what you've personally experienced, and then, you know, your ancestors have experienced, the emotions that must tap into. I can't really begin to imagine what they must be, and then they come out as art.
Yeah. Yeah, when I write it, kind of like those same emotions of, you know, like oppression and sadness and stuff are like it's not really anything you can do anything about, you know. It's in the past, and it's past trauma, so it's stuff I like really don't think about ever, and you know, like on a day-to-day basis, and I think a lot of people are like that too, and like it can kind of like creep up on you a bit when you know, it's like not like I don't really ever, you know, I'm not walking around like super sad because of those things all the time, but like it kind of like climaxes sometimes, and sometimes it'll just like pour out, you know, and that's when I write another song, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I get that, because you can't, like you said, it is as evil as it is past trauma. There's not a single thing that a person today can do in terms of actually physically changing you can try and make it right, but you can never change what's happened. So there's no point spending your life like upset about it, because you're only going to damage yourself, because you're only going to kind of have a negative effect on your own life. But equally, you can only kind of push those things down to a point where sometimes there's going to be something that triggers it. There's going to be a news article. You're going to just see things and it's going to be like, yeah, that fucking actually really pisses me off.
Yeah, absolutely. That's like a perfect way to describe it, I think. So.
Is there something about like the genre of black metal that like for you makes it sort of the perfect way of, one, connecting to emotions, and two, also like connecting to nature? Is like black metal specifically, or could you do this through other genres as well?
I think it is definitely, black metal would definitely be the best. And I think that's why, like, part of why I started this and doing Blackbraid in the way that I do it is because black metal is like has such a massive following amongst Native Americans and all across the country. And I think it's because we really identify with it a lot. I mean, it's pretty much born from all of the same issues that we face. It's like kind of almost like a mirror across the ocean there. Like it's really based in nature worship and paganism and kind of connecting with the land, but there's also insanely dark aspects to it, and it's extremely anti-Christian. And black metal black metal is made by pagans that were oppressed by the Christians and have been fighting it since the formation of black metal, like being anti-Christian and things like that are have like always been like right at the forefront of the genre. And it's just like it's just so similar to our life experience just as natives. Like there's so many natives that just love black metal anyway, and it's it just seemed perfect, like. And it's even way before any of these native black metal bands existed. Like we all love like everyone loves Mayhem and Immortal and Satyricon. Like everyone just loves all the natives love black metal. So it's like they fit really well together, I guess.
Yeah,
that's so fascinating, because for me, particularly in the UK, it feels like the metal scene, and I guess the whole rock scene in general, like covering all the genres, have just declined from when I was a kid. It felt like it was much bigger, and then recently you get maybe a good metal bar. There might be like one in Leeds, which is a big fucking city. Like you might get one, maybe two metal bars. Like it's just not. It just feels like it's just not there. And I'm sure there is.
You guys have gone pop. That's what.
Yeah, I'm sure there is a huge underground scene, but it's just nowhere near kind of popularizing. You don't get. I know my favorite rock bars from when I was younger were all shut down. It's just not kind of. And then when I go see Alyssa in Oslo, and there's 4, 5, 6 metal bars in like a close vicinity, it's like, oh yeah, this I like this, but it just seems to have died over here. It's a real shame.
It's it's the same in Denmark. Like everything you hear on the radio in Denmark nowadays is either like the most recent pop music that has come out, or ancient 80s pop. Like it's like, why? What has happened to you people?
It feels like hip hop, and grime have taken over from what pop punk and new metal were in like the early 2000s. Like it feels like it's just taken that shift from like Blink, Good Charlotte, like Limp Bizkit, like those bands when I was a kid. What that whole movement then has just become kind of all hip hop and grime and that kind of thing, and then the rock has just really kind of disappeared. You occasionally get a good new rock band, I guess. Like certainly not on the radio. Like
I think
to
like
Radio 1.
The rock definitely, just the straight up like rock and roll genre probably suffers the most, in my opinion. Like I'm not saying there's no there's no good rock and roll bands out there, but it's just so much rarer than it was 20 years ago, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. But America still has a pretty solid metal scene. Like a lot of Americans ask me, "Why do you live over here?" And then I'm like, like, well, the metal scene is great.
So, what do you think the reason is for the decline? Do you think it's just like changing tides, like things just come and go, and rock and metal will have its day again in kind of like the popular culture?
Yeah, it's very hard to say. I don't really know, honestly, like what drives people to make great rock and roll, but it seems like less people are doing it recently. So
yeah, it really does. It could be a case of the people are still making it. It's just not popular, so it's not kind of getting put on fucking MTV or like, you know,
Is that still a thing?
I don't know. Do MTV show music anymore?
I
don't think so.
But like one of their spin-off channels, like MTV2 or one of those ones. But you know what I mean? Like they're not getting played on fucking BBC Radio 1 or whatever the big radio stations are in America. Like they're just not getting put there. So people are still making it. They're just not kind of getting put into the avenue because it's not the in thing right now.
The thing is also, you have those big labels, right? And they're looking for artists and bands and performers who fit into a very specific formula that they have for pushing music on the public in general. And that's I guess is Justin Bieber still a thing? I don't remember, but I haven't been clued in with like pop music for like decades now. So.
Fucking Justin Bieber.
Yeah, I think he is. And part of it probably comes back to artists like him too, where like they don't write their own music. It's probably a big part of it, I think. They have like a ghostwriter or something like 30 or 40 years ago that was kind of unheard of, it was happening a little bit, but now like the big pop rock bands, like 90% of them ghostwrite. It used to be,
I remember seeing
at least more than half of them would write their own things in the past. It's become a thing where it's like, it's probably one guy, there's probably 6 guys or 7 guys that wrote the entire top 40 chart. And they're just reselling their work to everyone.
That's it. I remember seeing a meme once. There was like Bohemian Rhapsody, like Freddie Mercury, like one song, one artist, like written by this one person, and then it was like Beyonce. Is it like Who Runs the World? The girl song. It's like there's like fucking. It's the same lyric pretty much all the way through the song, and it's like formed by Beyonce, but it was ghost written by someone else, and it's like there's like like 20 words in the whole fucking song, and it's like there's no comparison between those two, but. It's almost like they've just found a formula, kind of like Disney do, like Marvel do with Disney films, Disney do with Marvel films now in the superhero films. It's all the same fucking film, just put with a new fancy cover on it. Whatever superhero, they take the same model, they put a new little shell on it and put make it look nice, and then go, okay, here you go, and everyone laps it up. It's the same fucking thing. They follow the same path. Like the hero almost gets there, then has a little bit of struggle, but then comes back at the end. Like it's the same.
Thanks a lot, Joseph Campbell, for your fucking hero's journey bullshit.
It's the same. It's the same model every time, and everyone laps up. And I feel like they've done that with music now. They know these little artists what they have to do, and it's almost like lab created musicians. They go, okay, you need to look this way, do this, act this way, sing this song, and they're just a pretty face with a voice now. They're not artists or musicians anymore.
Yeah, that's a perfect. I mean, the Marvel movies are a perfect analogy because it's like that's exactly what they are. I mean,
I give up on them.
Don't get me started on them. I don't really understand people's obsession with them, but to me, it's like it's kind of like blatant like military US like propaganda like wrapped up in like superheroes, and it's like I don't
Insane.
understand how people could watch, like we're on like the 5 or 10th Avengers movie, and like they've all had the same plot and people are still watching them.
Still lap it up. Yeah, I gave up.
Yeah.
I think I got to like Endgame, because I used to watch them all, like every one of them, because I was a big comic books fan. And then I watched them all until Endgame. And then they started releasing all the TV shows on Disney Plus, and then all the films. I'm like, I can't fucking keep up. I cannot keep up with this. And they all kind of link in. I'm just like, I don't have the time. And they're all, like I said, just all remodeled of the same thing. It's just whatever. Maybe I'll watch it.
I mean, it's what happens, right, when you industrialize art, right? Because what you do is that you take the creations of a person that started out as something personal to them, is something that they gave to the world because they had something significant in them, right? And then you funnel it through this like manufacturing line, and then you end up with airport books and Marvel movies and the same shitty pop music over and over again. And like hip hop is a great example of this too. Hip hop used to have a lot of soul and character. It used to be telling us a lot of things about the people who were writing it and the worlds that they were living in and so on.
Well, it was from a struggle and oppression. It was raw, like black metal was. And I guess still is just like from that raw place.
Exactly. And then you have some 80s looking producer boss who shows up with his big fat cigar and he's like tinted glasses, and he's like we're going to turn this into an industry, and then boom, the spirit of it has gone, right? And so now all hip hop is like while somebody is going right. So there you are.
Yeah, everything gets fucking ruined, isn't it?
No, not everything. Don't get that depressed.
To expand on what you said, even with the Marvel stuff, like it's funny you said like it starts as like some gift, that some artist gave us and just gets tainted, and it's like you could almost watch the downfall of comic books like happen at when Stan Lee died. Like as soon as his hands weren't in it anymore, it just became a market instead of an art. And like now it's kind of embarrassing what it's become, but like it's sad because I don't even know how long ago he died. I think it's only been maybe 5 years or something, but like I'm sure he'd be very upset to see the amount of decline that has happened in like less than a decade.
Because I guess people have even towards the end, I'm sure he was slipping with his control on it, but there's almost like a certain level of respect there to keep a level. And then once it's gone, it's like free for all. It's like, it's the same thing that happens with anything. It's a power vacuum, whether it's a fucking Colombian or Mexican cartel, or it's fucking Disney and Marvel. Like when you release a figurehead, like everybody just goes, fuck, I want that job, and rushes into it, and it just becomes a fucking mess. And it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's when Sir Alex Ferguson left Man United. That's the only football reference I'm ever going to give on here. But it's the same thing. It's like you have this person who's there for well over a decade, and then when you remove them, everyone goes, what the fuck do we do now? I want that job. And everyone just runs for it, and it just makes them, it just all falls to pieces. But it's such a it's such a shame. We were gonna briefly or talk about any comparisons between the two, because I think it's commonly accepted now that the Vikings made it to Lanzo Meadows, and there was some form of settlement there on the east of Canada, and there was some contact with natives. So do we know how far that went, Matthias? I don't know if maybe you're more clued up on that, on how far that kind of spread. And then are there any links we can make between the two cultures that we can kind of say whether they were directly passed between or something? I don't know whether.
Okay, so
exchange of information.
Right. Yeah. There's a couple of things to say. So one thing is like, do we see links between like, what we can call Scandinavian culture and Native American cultures, right? Because there are many on this continent. Nothing that we can say is sort of like a direct result of interactions in that time period. It's not like there's been, like transferal of like stories or rituals or anything like that between the groups that we can at least identify. I mean, that doesn't mean that it might have happened. Like that doesn't mean that it might not have happened. It could have happened, but what we can't say. What we can say is that so the Eurasian expanse, right, especially Central Asia, that whole area has been a cultural powerhouse for a lot of early cultures and traditions, right? So think of what is now like Western China, Mongolia, Southern Siberia, that whole area. We see a lot of similarities between existing cultures in that general area and North American cultures, and also some European cultures. And one example, for instance, is the creation myth that we see in a lot of different cultures, in sort of that belt around the northern hemisphere. One of the most well-known ones is the creation of Turtle Island, right, where we have, depending on which culture we talk about, it's either a water bird of some kind or it's a muskrat that brings up mud from under the water and puts it on the back of a turtle. And we have similar types of stories in Siberia, across all the way to Scandinavia. And the most well-known one from Scandinavia is the one that we find in Kalevala in the Finnish mythology, where the world is built on the godmother, where it's the same, but taking mud from the bottom of the ocean and putting it on top of her. And there also seems to be a reference to that in Scandinavian mythology in Virluspa, where we have the three creative gods that is said to lift the world out of the ocean as well. So that's like a possibility of some like deep link that goes far back in time and has its origin in that Central Asian area. And the other creation myth we have in Scandinavia, right, is the story about how the world is created from Ymir's body. Like his flesh becomes the soil, and his bones become the rocks, and his hair becomes the trees, and all that stuff. And the Zuni here in this southwest, they actually have a very similar story. And this is also a story that we find in several places on the Asian continent. So yeah, that's those are some examples of like these possible similar types of stories that have their origin far back in time and then have spread out like that. Now, when it comes to like the history of interactions between Scandinavians and Native Americans in the far east of North America, we know that there was a presence of Scandinavians in 1021 that has been accurately dated. That's where we have the Lonzo Meadows site. We also know that was a short duration, like it wasn't a long a long stay. It wasn't it's like a colony or anything like that. It was probably like a trading station where they were going over and then like trading with possibly with the Mi'kmaq. And the story is actually the sagas that we have that talk about them coming over. They're one, the ones who come over, they're Christian. And two, they have conflicts and then they leave again. That's like the saga, and this is quite interesting because we don't have like evidence of conflict. Like it doesn't look like there was like battles between people, in at least not in archaeological remains. So this might be after rationalizations in Iceland for why we abandoned that settlement over there. I think the reason that they actually abandoned it was that it was too hard to maintain, because the distance is so far. You have to sail across some pretty dangerous oceans, and essentially the main reason that they were going there, I think, and a lot of other scholars think that as well, is that they were looking for wood, because that didn't grow in Greenland where they had settled, and there wasn't a lot left in Iceland either. So they were looking for wood to build ships. And so when they started losing ships in that, on that dangerous journey, essentially, it's just like a resource situation. You can't maintain that any longer. That's probably why they abandoned it. So
you think it was abandoned and not kind of?
Yeah, I think so.
They moved elsewhere. I mean, there's all sorts of theories of them going down, down the coast and then settling inland, or
the theory where they went to Mexico.
I mean, there is all sorts. Went to Minnesota, obviously.
Yes, carved rune stones over there.
But there's all these things. But am I not right in thinking that there was a ship repair port at Lanzo Meadows? Like there was something which would at least suggest that it was semi-permanent if they set up.
I mean, they did build something that they probably intended for it to be permanent. But then I think, it's too resource intensive for, 1,500 people maximum in southern Greenland to maintain that.
Yeah.
It was too risky as well. They would have to sail over to like straight across from Greenland to Baffin Island. This we know from the sagas because they describe it. They say we get to Hetland first. That's the land of the rocks. And then you sail southwards to Markland. That's the land of trees. And then you get to Vinland, which means the land of meadows, or the land where grapes grow. And interestingly, in that Lanzo Meadows site, they found, I think it's called a butter walnut or something like that. And they don't grow at that latitude. That has been traded from farther south, where and the interesting thing is that type of tree grows in the same zone where you also have grapes. So they might actually have called it, grape land or wine land, because they knew that existed there. So, but that's really that. Now there's a bunch of like myths about what Vikings did and all that stuff. If you go to Rhode Island, you can see this nice Romanesque late or maybe mid 1500s tower built in stone, probably by Portuguese or something like that. People claim is a Viking tower. It's
yeah. Oh, it was partly Templar as well, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, there's like all these theories.
The Templars have something to do with that.
The Templars, the Freemasons, Templars, Freemasons, and Vikings all go together in those fantasies, like they come from the same place. And there's also in Boston, there's a park where it says there's this beautiful statue of Leif Erikson wearing what appears to be like those modern like cycling shoes that you clip in to the pedals, and then like really tight tights and a cheerleader skirt and a metal bra of some kind, and that's supposed to be a Viking outfit. And then it says that he built his house there in that park some time ago. And I was like, no, he didn't. But great story, guys.
It just gets lost, doesn't it? And
well, yesterday was to some people, I guess, Columbus Day. I don't know who actually celebrates that anymore.
Is that still a thing?
Like for some dude in Alabama or something, I don't know. So, and Columbus is one of the people that people have latched on to prop up their colonization of this country, right? Another one is of course also Leif Erikson, right? So back in the early 20th century, there was like this war going on between Anglo-German / Scandinavian settlers and then like Italian Spanish settlers about like who could claim this country, right? And so like the Anglo-German Scandinavians, they all latched on to Leif Erikson, and that's where all of these stories come from, right? About settling in Boston and I don't know what. So
here's something funny and also embarrassing. Until it might also show the British in me and our ignorance of assuming everybody is like us. That I thought until I was mid-20s, I thought Christopher Columbus was British. I thought embarrassingly late. And embarrassingly late, we don't really learn about Christopher Columbus in British history. It's kind of like skirted around as he discovered. They kind of say, he discovered the West Indies or whatever, and thought it was like the Far East, and then whatever. I just legitimately thought he was British. I just assumed Christopher Columbus. That's a British sounding name. That's a British man. Like I swear to God, I just assumed he was British. And then I was looking, someone was like, no, he's Italian. I was like, no, he's not. Like, no, he's not. He's Christopher Columbus. I'm British. no. Apparently Christopher Columbus was Italian. And I was too old.
To be fair to you, there's way too many people who think he's Spanish too. So, like, I mean,
did he sail for the Portuguese Empire?
Spanish.
Was it Spanish?
Yes.
Okay, there you go. I'm wrong again.
But yeah, that's why they think he's Spanish. But yeah,
I was going to say the same thing, but then I would have offended a bunch of people. I know they're not the same thing. It would have been a joke, but I'm not going to make it. But I kind of did make it, but I didn't. Should we wrap this up before I get in any more trouble? Thank you very much. Please pronounce your name again so I can try and do it. Skagasawa?
Perfect. Yeah.
There we go. I got it. I'm notoriously bad for pronouncing names wrong on here. I appreciate you so much for taking the time and certainly educating me on a bunch of stuff that I just don't know. That we just in this area of the world, I guess it's not really our history, so it just doesn't get taught. But I think it's so important that it should be heard and should be spread far and wide to as many people as possible.
Absolutely, yeah. Thank you guys for having me. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, this was a great conversation. Oh, Dan, by the way, to attach a little comment to that, actually, it is also very much part of your history, right? Like New England.
No, they just really they just stole all our places, like New York. There's like pretty much everywhere over here, just in America somewhere.
I guess
New York. There's a Manchester, isn't there? I'm sure I saw like a Leeds the other day, or like a Wrexham. There's like pretty much everything. I feel like if you move from a place here and then went to America, that you're like, I'm just gonna call this the same place as my old place. It's the same name. Just give it the same name, and that's how inventive it was. Matt in the chat says he lives in Lancaster. The next city over is York. They just copied all our shit.
They did, yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
So,
no, this was a great conversation. I feel like I learned a lot, man. Thank you.
Me
Awesome.
too.
Yeah, me too.
And I know all our listeners will appreciate, and they will have learned so much. Let people know where they can listen to your music first and foremost.
Oh man, right now it's everywhere. Really wherever you want to hear it. Spotify, YouTube, Amazon, whatever you use. I got it on pretty much everything now. So
Nice. Are you on Instagram? People
I
find you
am,
there?
yeah. Yeah. It's Blackbraid_cult with a K on Instagram there.
Perfect. Matthias, where can people find you?
You can find me on Instagram, just my name, Matthias Norvig, and then you could also check out my website once in a while because I got good stuff on there, like recommended books on reading about Vikings and such things.
Oh, volcanoes? Books of volcanoes?
There's a little bit about volcanoes. No, actually.
No. Yeah, if you want to follow me personally, it's Daniel_Farron1. Obviously, you can follow the business at Horns of Odin. If you can support, well, if you enjoy what we do and you can support us on Patreon, we would very much appreciate it. It helps us keep growing the show, helps us keep employing new people to help us out and getting bigger and better. We're going to be doing story time again. I spoke to Jonas last week. He wants to come back and do story time maybe once a month, which will always be good fun. If you haven't ever listened to a story time episode, please it's worth just getting the lowest Patreon subscription and listening to the story time episodes. Me, Matthias, Jonas sit down and Jonas reads one of the sagas. We did the whole saga of the Volsungs. He put on a bunch of different voices for the characters. It was a really good time. There's the whole bunch of those episodes are on Patreon. You can listen to. If you can, please go check that out. Obviously, you can follow us on Nordic Mythology Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, the website, the usual places. And yeah, thank you very much. I love this. It was a lot of fun. These episodes are always the best for me, where I can just learn things and get sucked in.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you.
Yeah.
It was a blast. So
thank you very much.
Man.
Take care, and we'll let you know when the episode comes out, and yeah, so you can check it out, share it, whatever.
All right. Sounds good.
Awesome, man. Take it easy. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks. You too.
Take care.
Bye.